Welcome to 1000 Ways to Lead. My name is Jacob Stracely. I'm your host today. Joined here with Bree Dacey and Reed Chauvin. How's it going, guys?
Hey.
What's up, Jacob? Well, guys, I just had a great conversation with Brock Hardisty. He's the CFO of Chapman Lake Instruments, and he is involved with selling direct-to-consumer custom-made pocket knives.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
Cool.
It was a very good conversation. As an avid collector of just anything that I can fit in my pocket, I thought it was a really fun conversation to hear how he actually focuses on his end consumer. And I've got a question for y'all. Like, did y'all collect anything fun as a kid or like now as an adult?
Collect? Oh, you know what I do have a collection of is that I have this like lamp at home, and every year my family puts our beach badges, like our year-end beach badges,
Oh,
that are like
nice.
pins in the lamp. So we have it going like back from 2010 or something, but there's like this big lamp with all of our beach badges over the years.
Interesting. What about
Yeah.
you, Reed?
I'm not much of a collector. I'm a minimalist.
You're a minimalist? That's nice.
Although I remember you telling a story about how you used to collect pocket knives and whittle little sticks.
I've got
Your dad. I remember you telling me that story. So this is probably like a very heartwarming.
Oh, dude,
conversation.
I was looking up their pocket knives as we were having this conversation, seeing if I can get one. But no, I used to collect rocks, coins, pocket knives. So this conversation was cool. It kind of felt like it was directed towards me. But these custom built knives are collector's items. Yes, they could be used for outdoors focused people, things like that. But really, these are the same people that collect coins and collect antiques. So it was really interesting talking to him about how he focuses his small business, develops his, people around the small business on these direct to consumer products, focused on these like very small niche market of antique collectors.
Yeah.
So
This is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping he talks a little bit about just like understanding the customer base, the target segment there. I mean, it sounds like he's very zeroed in on a specific subset of people. So I'd be interested to hear
yeah.
what Brock has to say about that.
Yeah, and I think another thing we talked about is as a leader, just like how do you pivot to your market if you pick the wrong one at the start? Like I think at the beginning they were thinking these custom knives were going to be a little more geared towards those outdoorsmen, and it turns out it's really for the collector.
Yeah.
So changing that strategy of marketing, especially with a small team and dealing with how do you pivot to those groups of people is a really interesting conversation. The other thing is he brought in Luke Frobe a few times, so
Right.
a few good points from Luke Frobe in there too. So
Look forward, reason back.
exactly. Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, but I'm excited to get into it, guys.
Yeah, can't wait to hear it.
All right, let's get into it.
Brock, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to have this conversation today. How are you doing?
Fantastic, man. It's a beautiful day here in Nashville. And as you can see, I've moved the office out to the back porch today. So how are you?
I'm doing well. I was thinking about doing the same thing, putting it on the Vandy courtyard, but there's a little too many people out there today. So
Yeah, I
decided
bet it's crowded today.
It is. Let's just jump right into it. Brock, I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of your career trajectory from Owen to where you are now, just to get started.
Sure. I went to Baylor University down in Texas, studied journalism there, wanted to be the next great international correspondent, and came out of school in 2008, which was not a great time to go into the media field or most any field for that matter. So I landed at a small boutique marketing firm. They were based out of Chicago, and I was living in Austin, Texas. Spent a few years with them doing experiential marketing, a lot of mobile marketing tours, things that you see set up at festivals, events, hockey games, trade shows, that sort of thing. And it was a very small company, about 8 of us, and there was really no upward mobility. So I had kind of observed through a lot of our clients that the people we were working for, a lot of the marketing managers, the brand managers, they had their MBAs. So I thought, hey, let's take the GMAT and give this a shot. And that was really as far as my thinking went. You know, a lot of people at Owen came in with very explicit career goals and, wanted to move into investment banking or wanted to go into consulting. I had no such plan. I was very fun and fancy free about the process. Some might say borderline reckless with it. But I just wanted to have that experience and, improve my education, gain a new skill set of tools to be able to kind of take my career to the next level. Had a great 2 years at Owen, learned a ton from my classmates, a ton from my professors. And obviously just being in that community exposes you to so many different new ideas and new ways of thinking that are valuable in the business world as well as personally. So from there, I landed in the beer industry. I moved out to California, worked for a Miller Coors distributor in Sacramento for about 3 years. And then my wife at the time and I had a chance to move back to Nashville. So stayed in the beer industry that whole time, moved over to Guinness Brewery, where I was a training and education director. And I got to drink beer and talk about it for a living, which was a job title I did not know existed. I don't know that it will ever exist again. And that was a dream job, really. I traveled extensively, met so many great people working for Guinness and just kind of spreading the joy of that beverage and the history behind it. The downside to it was, and this was in the back of my head, even while I had the job, was where do I go from here? This is a pretty unusual job description, obviously. And you jump on Indeed, you're not going to find a lot of drink beer and talk about it type jobs. So 2020 hits. And as we all know, that was a very tumultuous year for all of us in a lot of different ways. And so that ultimately ended the program that I was with at Guinness. Unfortunately, a lot of people got laid off that year, and I started looking for the next thing. So that kind of brings us to where we're at today. My brother and I, he was running a small manufacturing company in southern Indiana, and he had this concept for a high-end custom pocket knife. And he's a brilliant design engineer, but didn't really know how to take a direct-to-consumer product and set up any of the sales and marketing behind it. So he kind of brought me in. We partnered up, and we've been producing these high-end custom pocket knives for the last almost 4 years now.
Wow, very cool. I'm excited to get more into the pocket knives. But first, I would just kind of want to get a better idea of your background. You know, you mentioned journalism and then working in the beer industry. Now you're working in the knives industry. When you look back at these, what is the common thread in these different industries, especially in the form of transferable skills that you found that connects you to all these roles?
The common thread that would unite them all the best would be the storytelling aspect. Something that drew me to journalism, obviously, was, wanted to capture people's stories, wanted to share them with the world in beer, and especially at Guinness, with the 260 some year history. There's so many fantastic stories to be told that center around not only the process of brewing beer and the history behind the brewery, but just the stories that get shared over a pint of beer. And that was a big thing that we really tried to highlight at that company. And moving to now, with pocket knives, which don't seem to have any positive correlation to beer or to journalism, something that I really try to emphasize in our company's marketing is the faces behind the brand. This is a team of machinists and operators and engineers who work tirelessly day in, day out to showcase the best that American manufacturing has to offer. And it's something really cool to have tangible that you can hold in your hand and be able to think about everything that went into creating that product.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned storytelling. I tell people that that's one of the best things that I've learned from Owen is the ability to communicate effectively and tell a story to a new audience. You can learn the financials, you can understand the background on a product, but if you can't explain it to a new audience and do it in a way that's engaging, then you're not going to sell any product. So how has that story been told in the knife industry? As you're building these custom knives, you mentioned the sales and marketing aspect of it. How have you developed that sales and marketing technique for these custom knives, and maybe going into more detail about these knives in general?
The sales and marketing strategy was not at all what I anticipated it to be. When we first were prototyping and working out a business plan for this, I assumed we would be targeting the Bass Pro Shop, Cabela's, hunter, outdoorsman, fisherman, hiker. I figured this would be kind of a backwoods product, people who are into bushcrafting and survivalism, that kind of thing. I couldn't have been more wrong. We do sell a little bit to that audience, but the vast majority of our sales are to what I'll call the connoisseur demographic. Guys who just like nice stuff, nice watches, nice cars, nice pens, and they're collectors of these knives. One of the first guys I met at a trade show came up and told me, I've got a couple of gun safes in the basement with $250,000 worth of knives in them. I don't even know half of what's down there. It
Oh
just
my
blew my
God.
mind. It's like the same kind of people who, may have 30, 40, 50 guitars hanging in their basement and they play them rarely to ever. But they're people who appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into these products and they just like to have nice stuff. And those types of collectors, those types of connoisseurs, they really respond to that storytelling. They want to know what makes this knife different, what sets it apart. And so having the story, having the machine shop there, the family owned aspect of it, two brothers teaming up to kind of bring their own skills to the table and create something that's really unique and different. That's resonated a lot with our customers.
Interesting. And how do you bring in the employees in that story as well?
We talk about our background a lot. Chapman Lake Instrument is the medical side of our company, and it's been in business for nearly 40 years. We do a lot of orthopedic and surgical tools. And so there's kind of two angles that I play at with that. First one, obviously, being that precision needed to machine these high-end surgical tools is the same care and precision that we use in our knives. And that really sticks with people. But also just having that experience and being able to say, we create premium level CNC machined products that very few companies can replicate.
And if I'm not mistaken, this is a pretty small shop, right?
Very small. We're about 5,000 square feet, about 13 employees. So it's a very tight knit family group. Again, most of the people who work there have been there for at least 15, 20 years, if not more.
Wow. So, just thinking about just running a small business in general, what's the hardest part of managing a small team that has that pretty intense experience of building these knives, building this precision equipment? How do you manage a small team effectively?
Well, it's a lot like family, when you're around each other for that much and that often and for that long a time, you have personality clashes. You have, a little too much familiarity sometimes. But for the most part, everybody is well established in their role. They know what it takes to succeed. They know what we're capable of doing. So we don't really run into a whole lot of headwinds there. The one challenge that we've faced, obviously, is with the traditional structure of Chapman being business to business. We're selling medical equipment to large multinational medical technology companies. And now we're trying to bring in this kind of subsidiary company that's doing direct to consumer, a completely different model. Getting the buy-in on that took a little bit of time, but I think people are starting to see the vision.
Yeah. Talk to me more about that. How do you develop that buy-in? I think a lot of it goes back to storytelling, but would love for you to go into detail on, how do you secure buy-in about that?
Well, the proof's always in the pudding. And I think as the sales have increased on that side of things, our staff have seen that, this isn't just some kooky idea that Brock and his brother cooked up over a beer one night. This is something that has some legs and could potentially allow us more flexibility as a company to grow. One of the big risks in the manufacturing industry is that you're beholden to the business cycles of all your customers. And so when you have a downturn like we did in 2020 and 2021, where elective surgeries were being postponed, if you're a surgical equipment maker, that's going to be a big problem for you. And so having that ability to pivot to a direct to consumer product where you can utilize that machine time and utilize that expertise and utilize that labor to develop a different product, that's going to give you the ability to ride out those short-term storms.
Where do you see the growth trajectory of these custom knives in relation to the precision medical equipment? Do you see it having to open up a new manufacturing facility, or where are you in terms of that utilization right now?
Luckily for us, we have plenty of room to grow. We could add a second and third shift just with our existing footprint and close to triple our output overnight if we needed to. And then the facility that we have, there's plenty of room for expansion there too. So my goal is to reach some heavy growth. One of the big growth areas for us on the knife side of things is what's called OEMing, basically taking another designer, bringing their design to us, and we would just be the manufacturer making the physical product for them, but then they would brand it and sell it under their own trademark. And so we've been approached by a number of brands, in fact, kind of an overwhelming number of brands, just based on the quality that they've seen in our own namesake brand. So that's something that we're pursuing currently. We plan to have 2 or 3 of those models out this year, and we'll continue to hopefully grow that in the future.
Interesting. At the heart, you're an entrepreneur. What does that day-to-day look like in terms of making those decisions? Whether to take on these other companies that are just looking for you to develop their product, or figuring out utilization rates, or going to trade shows. How do you make those decisions? And is it based more on intuition, or is it based on data? Just curious on how that decision-making process unfolds for you and your brother?
There's a healthy dose of both the
Mhm.
data and kind of the intuition. I think probably the biggest thing for me is trying to look ahead and see what your goals are, and then trying to reason your way back. Look forward, reason back was
Mhm.
some of the good advice I got in the past in terms of that daily decision making and finding ways to make difficult decisions, because you don't always have all the data and you can't always trust your intuition. So you have to balance those two, I think. And luckily for us, we're a small enough company and we're fairly nimble. We're able to make quick decisions and pivot as necessary. So
Right.
if we do, make a misstep here and there, it's not going to be necessarily a fatal flaw. It's a learning experience and you hopefully grow from it.
The good thing about being a small business and working in a new market and growing that market is you can do those pivots. You can change when necessary, and you could do it quickly as opposed to having to get a whole organization on board. I want to pivot just a little bit and bring it back to what you mentioned earlier when you were speaking about your background. You mentioned loving this job in the beer industry, which sounds like a incredible opportunity. I would love to do that myself. Drink beer and talk about it all day. That sounds like a great job. But then having to suddenly, reinvent yourself in 2020 when this job went away. I would love to just hear more about what was that transition like? Were there any steps you followed during that transition? How did you go full force into custom knives? And how was that both emotionally and professionally?
Emotionally and professionally, I mean, it was rough on both ends. And obviously 2020 was, a huge upheaval in most of the world. Hopefully a year that we will not repeat in our lifetime. But with that, I found myself with a lot of downtime. And as a result, it was a chance to kind of reevaluate. It was a chance to try to work on sharpening some soft skills and some reassessment, really, of what I wanted the rest of my career to look like. And so, with my brother up in Indiana, already running this manufacturing facility, and him having this idea that was kind of half baked but needed someone to pull it across the finish line, it was really
Right.
serendipitous opportunity. And I'm thankful for the timing that it worked out the way that it did, and that our skills were able to complement each other so well, and that he had the engineering and design expertise and I had some of the business fundamentals necessary to reach a market with it. So it's not something that I ever would have planned. It's not something that I ever would have
Right.
expected. But, I was blessed with having been equipped with the skills at Owen and through my career that we were kind of able to make that change and find something new and exciting.
I'm curious also to hear more about the knives and how did you go from 0 to 1? I think a lot of people that listen to this have an entrepreneurial interest, at least. And the hardest part is making that first sale, right? How do you actually build a
100%.
product and then market it to those correct individuals? So I'm curious how you had that first sale, what that looked like. How did you market effectively? And then how have you tweaked over time to make sure you're targeting the correct people? Because as you mentioned, you thought they were going to be wildlife enthusiasts or outdoorsmen, those types of people. Instead, it's it's the people that are also collecting Rolex watches or shotguns or guitars. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. To me, it seems like an iterative process, but I'd love to hear your take on what that process looked like to get to where you are now.
Yeah, because again, we were really surprised and had no idea what we were doing. Didn't even know this knife enthusiast market existed in the way that it does.
I had no idea.
So what we were focused on for the first year and a half was just getting the product right. And that took a number of iterations and design tweaks. One of the first things I did was we sent out a small batch of prototypes with a friend of mine who is a sound technician. Here in Nashville, he goes on the road, goes on tours, and so
Yeah.
we had his team take it out on the Brooks and Dunn tour. Field tested every day. They're cutting tape, cutting rope, putting this thing through its paces, and they came back with a couple great design suggestions that we ended up implementing in our first production model. And so that was a good way to get kind of some instant cheap feedback. And from there, I focused heavily on photography, just trying to showcase in the best possible light, literally, the products, and
Right.
sharing those photos to social media. And actually the day we launched, I put up a Reddit post on the knife enthusiast subreddit, and we got our first 12 or 15 sales overnight.
No way.
And I don't think that is probably a typical route for an unheard of product from a couple of brothers and making stuff at their family machine shop. But we were, again, very lucky to kind of have a design that resonated with people.
Right.
It was very different from what was on the market at the time, and still is, for that matter. From there, we leaned heavily into trade shows. YouTube influencers have been a big boost to our sales, finding the right people that know how to put that knife through its paces, test it, showcase the elements of it that this enthusiast marketplace is really interested in, and just going out and talking to people. These trade shows are crucial for that, because people want to talk to the maker. They want to hear that story, shake your hands, ask you questions, why you put this there instead of there, why you made these different design choices. So through all those things, though, it really does come back to the storytelling. It's always about what went into this product and what makes someone want to carry it in their pocket every day.
Right. And I imagine that's one of the most crucial elements for your target consumer base too, is understanding the people behind the actual knife. What's the story? Two brothers building this company, I think, is a really important aspect. Were your first sales or from these enthusiasts, or were they from just random people that were interested in the knives? At what point did you figure out that you should market directly to these collectors?
So it really did stemmed from that first Reddit post. We got a dozen or so orders overnight, and we were just jumping up and down, because this whole year and a half, we've been in pre-production mode on this knife. And we were like, if we sell one knife to somebody who we don't know, we're going to feel pretty happy. You expect your friends or your aunt and uncle or grandparent to maybe throw you a bone every once in a while, but we're like, okay, if we sell one to a stranger, we'll feel good about it. And so selling those right off the bat, day one, was pretty incredible. And we got a ton of feedback from those customers. As soon as they had it in hands, they were making suggestions about, improvements we could make or different design decisions we might want to make, but also making suggestions for how to market this thing. And the YouTube aspect was a big factor there. And, they made some introductions to some of the big influencers on YouTube, so that even though, we were unheard of and an unknown, we had a little bit of kind of a personal introduction there to be able to get into those spaces. And we were very blessed to see that kind of take on a life of its own from an early stage, just within the first 3 to 4 months.
How did you actually engage with that feedback? Did you change the engineering of your knife? Did you make a new addition to it? Kind of how did that process work out when they came up with, hey, you should add this to it, or you should do that? What did that look like from the perspective of the actual manufacturing of the knives? And how much did you take in customer feedback when developing them?
Good question. So there were really two elements of that. Some of the milder feedback, I'll call it, we were able to make small tweaks to that first model that we launched, and it didn't require, an overhaul of the entire knife. There were, just different tolerances, different radiuses, different angles you could tweak and continue the production as is. About a year into it, we decided to launch the second model, which was very much an evolution of the first, still a very similar design language, but had more drastic element changes. And that's the model that we've stuck with till today, based on kind of all that amassed feedback over the first year and a half.
Interesting. And do you see any of the design changing moving forward based on customer feedback, or is it just to get the product into a place that you want?
At this point with this model, I think we're pretty happy with where it's at. I am hoping to get to some new models here shortly with that OEM work that I've mentioned earlier. It's a balancing act of finding machine time and finding capacity to do all the things you want to do. We actually have a cigar cutter coming out, hopefully by the end of the month. That's sort of a brand extension of the knife angle of things. But hoping to do a lot more models in the future.
I have a few more questions, if you don't mind. One being,
sure,
you mentioned the cigar cutter. Is that going after the same audience as the knives, or is that, branding and marketing to a different audience?
There's a lot of overlap in that crowd, connoisseur crowd. A lot of these guys smoke cigars. At the show I was at in Fort Worth last weekend, everybody's down at the lounge after the show in the evening, having a glass of whiskey and a cigar. So there's definitely a big element of trying to hit that same target. But I think it's going to broaden our reach quite a bit too. I think a lot of people who would be interested in this product are people like me who never gave any thought to a high-end pocket knife before. But once they find the beauty in it, the utility in it, a lot of our customers call it pocket jewelry. But it's something that, it's a buy it for life product. And it's something that you can hand down to your son, to your grandson. And it's just a nice piece of American manufacturing that I think a lot of people don't give a lot of thought to on the day to day. But once they hold it in their hands, they think, there is a lot of value here.
Right. No, definitely. I want to, just take it broad for a moment. And after this conversation and kind of thinking through your background and your entrepreneurship and all that, I'm just kind of curious in general, what's some great advice that you've received throughout your career that, you still hold today?
One of the best pieces of advice that I dwell on often was from Luke Frobe, who's taught managerial economics for a long time there at Owen, and I know is not currently teaching, but is still very involved in the Owen community. In fact, I'm holding his coffee mug today.
I have one of those too.
Number 9 on his 10 rules is, if there's no solution, there's no problem. That didn't make any sense to me when I first heard it, but it makes a lot of sense now, because you're going to run into things in your career and your life that seem insurmountable. And sometimes there are just fundamental problems that have no solution. And as a result of that, they're really not problems at all, because you don't need to exert any energy trying to fix them. And so focusing on the controllables, focusing on ways to shift, ways to grow, ways to pivot, that's where your energy needs to be devoted. And so that's something that I've really carried with me through the Great Recession, through the COVID years, through, all the different hiccups and speed bumps of life. That's probably the best piece of advice I've received.